Today, we're diving into one of the most chilling and gruesome chapters of World War II history, the Japanese Unit 731. We'll uncover what happened within its walls, how experiments were conducted, who the subjects were, the outcomes achieved, and whether any survivors emerged from this horrific ordeal. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research unit of the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. Officially known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. It was a secret division of the Japanese military stationed in Manchuria during the 1930s and 40s. The unit performed human experimentation and tested acts of biological warfare on prisoners and civilians. It was commanded by a man named Ishii Shiro who used his position to encourage military interest in biological warfare. When the war ended, most of the documentation on the unit was destroyed and the true horrors of the experiments conducted only properly started to emerge decades later, but it is believed that thousands upon thousands lost their lives in Unit 731 in the name of advancing biological warfare. Largely the unit used Chinese citizens as their guinea pigs, and those who succumbed under the studies had their bodies dissected and autopsied to analyze the effects of their experiments. What occurred at Unit 731 includes some of the worst atrocities in history. Some of the things we know took place are live dissection of victims without any anesthesia, intentional infection with a plethora of diseases including the plague, cholera and tuberculosis. The majority of Unit 731's victims were Chinese and Korean civilians living in occupied territories. These individuals were abducted or taken from internment camps. Some Allied prisoners of war, including Americans, British, and Australians, also fell victim to Unit 731's experiments. These prisoners were subjected to the same horrors as civilian subjects. In the aftermath of World War II, when the dust had settled over the battlefield and the world was reeling from the horrors of war, a forgotten notebook surfaced in the most unlikely of places. It was discovered in the ruins of a once secret laboratory buried deep within the forests of Manchuria, China. The notebook contained the harrowing accounts of a doctor who had once been part of this sinister unit. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, the author of the notebook, had been a brilliant but morally compromised scientist who had dedicated his skills and intellect to the darkest of experiments. The pages of his notebook chronicled the unimaginable horrors he had perpetrated in the name of scientific curiosity and wartime necessity. Some of the experiments that were conducted under Unit 731 were: Experiment 1. Frostbite testing. Nakamura's notes began with experiments involving frostbite. He described subjecting captured Chinese prisoners to extreme cold, exposing their limbs to freezing temperatures for extended periods. He meticulously recorded the stages of frostbite development, from initial discoloration to the horrifying progression of gangrene. He sought to understand how long a human body could endure the cold before succumbing to death. Experiment 2. Biological weapons. The doctor's twisted curiosity then led him to delve into the creation of biological weapons. Nakamura detailed the development of deadly pathogens, such as anthrax and bubonic plague, and their delivery methods, including contaminated clothing and food. These experiments sought to determine the most effective ways to unleash devastating epidemics on enemy populations. Experiment 3. Vivisection. Perhaps the most horrifying of Nakamura's experiments were his vivisections. He documented the dissection of live subjects, primarily Chinese civilians and prisoners of war. He coldly observed the agony of his victims as they were dissected without anesthesia, all in the name of understanding human anatomy and the effects of various diseases on internal organs. Experiment 4. Weapons testing. The doctor's madness extended to testing unconventional weapons on humans. He detailed experiments where subjects were exposed to chemical and biological agents, often resulting in agonizing deaths. These tests were aimed at developing new and deadly weapons for wartime use. Experiment 5. Biological warfare trials. Nakamura's journal contained accounts of field tests involving the release of deadly pathogens on unsuspecting Chinese villages. He meticulously recorded the progression of outbreaks, observing the horrifying effects on the civilian population. These experiments aimed to assess the effectiveness of biological warfare as a means of mass destruction. Subjects were forcibly infected with diseases, often in various ways like drinking contaminated water or eating contaminated food. This was done to observe how infections spread. The notebook, too tainted to be preserved as a historical relic, was destroyed, its contents forever etched into the annals of history. Paradoxically, some of the research conducted at Unit 731 led to advancements in medicine. Insights gained from frostbite studies, for instance, contributed to understanding the condition better. Death by experimental weapons like high-altitude bombs intended to be filled with deadly gases like anthrax and clouds that disperse lethal bacteria intentional. Exposure to frostbite is the last experiment that has actually proven to be useful in the medical community, as Ishii's team discovered the best treatment for frozen limbs is to soak them in water at 37 degrees Celsius. To discover this, however, he repeatedly froze and defrosted human beings, making the price for the knowledge far too high. The work Unit 731 did was dehumanizing, and it's clear that they did not see their subjects as human at all. In fact, historian Sheldon Harris claimed they referred to their subjects as monkeys or Manchurian monkeys and other similar animal names. Few survived the horrors of the research program. Those who did were often permanently scarred, physically and mentally. Many victims died during or shortly after the experiments. Even now, Unit 731 remains relatively unknown, unlike the experiments of the Nazis, which were exposed after the war. The unit in Japan did not receive the same treatment. Incredibly, a lot of the Japanese researchers escaped punishment altogether, including General Ishii Shiro, who received immunity from prosecution for himself and his men. In fact, horrifyingly, a lot was done to cover up the truth of what had happened there, in no small part, who erased a lot of documentation in exchange for receiving the results of some of the medical experimentation that took place. This secrecy contributed to the long-lasting lack of awareness about the unit's activities. To this day, it's unknown just what research the US claimed from the Japanese as part of this agreement. That wraps up our deep dive into Unit 731, a chapter in history that should never be forgotten. If you found this video informative, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it to spread awareness about this important but harrowing topic. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. And as always, stay curious, stay informed, and stay horrified by the lessons of history.